I have two hobbies that I really enjoy doing: running and reading. The thing about running and reading is that a lot of people who don't do those activities must assume that if you run a lot or you read a lot, you are a natural runner or you are a natural reader. That must just be something you really enjoy, and so it naturally comes easy to you. No. When I first began running, every run felt like I was torturing myself. For weeks, I hated it, and now I love it. I can't get enough of it. I'm planning my races out that I want to do in 2022. And the same thing with reading. I really enjoy reading, but I went through a time where I wasn't reading a lot. I was reading kind of hardly anything. After I finished my Master in Divinity, I was kind of reading out. I was tired of reading books that other people were telling me to read. And so when I went to enter the ministry, I began really just only reading what I needed to in order to prepare for my sermons and Bible studies and church leadership. And outside of that, I was probably reading 5 or 6 books a year, and 3 or 4 of those books were usually fantasy books of great epics like J.R.R. Tolkien's writing. And so when it came to reading other Christian literature, I was reading hardly anything at all. And the problem was I'd read a book and I'd kind of get a third of the way through it, half of the way through it, and I just kind of get stuck. And I wanted to read more. So I looked online, found a bunch of tips and tricks on how to read more, and these are the 4 tips that helped me to go from reading 5 or 6 books a year to reading 50 or 60 books a year. Number 1 is read 3 to 4 books at once. Before, I thought this couldn't be possible. How can I juggle 3 or 4 books at a time? Well, once I began doing it, I saw that if you can watch more than one television series at a time, you can read more than one book at a time. It's really not all that difficult. But by reading 3 or 4 books at a time and only reading 2 to 5 pages of each book when you sit down to read it, it allows you to break those books up into a lot smaller sections. It also allows you to say, I got a couple of free minutes. I might only be able to get through 2 pages or 3 pages, but that's all I ever read of one book at a time anyway. And so it allows you to get in that extra reading where you can. And if you get stuck on a book, it's just turned into a slog and you're not enjoying it and you want to stop, well, that's okay if that's only one of the 3 books you're reading or one of the 4 books that you're reading, because you can supplement with the reading of that other book and then just keep slowly moving through that book you're not really enjoying at a snail's pace of 2 or 3 pages at a time. And then before you know it, by the end of the year, you've read 40 books, you've read 50 books, you've read 60 books. My second piece of advice is to get a Kindle or an e-reader. Studies have shown people who read on e-readers, they read more books. I think the reason you read more books is simply because if you got an e-reader, you always got your books with you, because if they're not on your e-reader, they're also on your phone, as most e-readers have apps where you can read the same book and pick it up in your phone or on your e-reader. So if you're sitting around somewhere and you got an extra 10 minutes waiting for your kids to finish a practice, well, you can read a few more pages here and there, and it allows you to read more. So I would really suggest getting a Kindle, especially a Kindle Paperwhite. At some point, I might do a video for what I think are all the benefits of using a Kindle Paperwhite. But I think that if you're not only reading paper books, you're holding yourself back from a potential of reading more if you would read on an e-reader. My third piece of advice to read more is to set goals. If you set goals for yourself, if you have something to look for, it'll help you push through on those hard days when you're like, oh, I don't want to read. I just want to sit around and watch TV or browse through social media. And those things are pretty much a waste of time. And so if you want something to push you to read more, set goals. I started out with goals of 30 books a year, and I easily surpassed them each year after I started it. This year, my goal was to read 55 books, and it looks like I'm probably going to read 75 books this year, in part because of the accountability from doing the book reviews on this YouTube channel. So set goals. You will read more if you set goals. I started setting goals in my running, and suddenly I began to run more, to run longer, to run faster after setting up those goals. So set goals for yourself. Say, in the next calendar year, I want to read 20 books. I want to read 30 books. Set that goal, and I guarantee you will read more. And when you're setting those goals, I would also encourage you to set the goal of reading a variety of books. Books on different types of subjects, fiction books, nonfiction books, and I think that variety will also help you reach your overall goal of number of books to read in the next calendar year. And my fourth piece of advice for reading more is to get accountability. Accountability is huge when it comes to beginning to set up a new discipline in your life, like reading more. So your accountability could be going to an online community, like joining Goodreads or a Facebook group, and just letting people know I'm checking another book off my list and here's what I thought about it. Or you could get together with a couple of friends in a reading group and do a book study together and just read a book at a time and let them know what books that you're reading through. But get some type of accountability where you're going to say to some other people, here are how many books I am going to read next year. So I set up on my Goodreads, I'm going to read 55 books next year. And all the other people who are doing the reading challenge too, they know that my goal is 55 books, so they can see it. And I want to meet that goal because I'm allowing their accountability to push me farther. So if you want to read more, if you feel like I want to be getting through 5, 10, 20 books a year, and you should, frankly, it's not that difficult. It doesn't take overly that much time. I am not a fast reader. I have none of those skills for flying through a book at quick speeds and reading a lot of words per minute. That is not me. But the way that I read more is I'm always reading 3 to 4 books at a time. I have my Kindle, my phone with me all the time so that when I have a few extra minutes, I can read. I set goals for the following year, and then I have accountability to make sure that I read more. And if you want to find accountability with me, you can look me up on Goodreads. We could be friends on there and be able to push each other to read even more in the following calendar year. So those are my small pieces of advice in order to read more. And I am really confident that if you put these into practice in your life, if you start reading 3 to 4 books at a time, reading books in 2 to 5 page chunks, and then moving on to the next book or moving on to the next activity, I think you will find that in the next year you might read more books in a calendar year than you've ever read before in your entire life. And if you enjoyed this advice, you think it's good and helpful, I'd encourage you to subscribe to this channel so you can get engaged in my book reviews, so that you can get even more ideas for what to read in your upcoming reading goals.